From Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a very logical amendment that I hope will be accepted. What this does is it takes a program that the Department of Justice announced last week that I've been encouraging the President and the Attorney General to engage in, and that is to expand the Clemency Department in the Department of Justice so that individuals who are unjustly incarcerated can appropriately be recommended to the President for commutations and or pardons. This Congress passed the Fairness in Sentencing Law a few years ago. The President signed it. It was in 2010. And it corrected what we found were errors in the judgment of this Congress in the way it incarcerated people in the distinctions of cocaine and crack, and found that it had a disparate impact and an illogical impact on African Americans. That cocaine and crack are basically the same drug. But for years, it was a 100-to-1 ratio in the quantity, working against what was considered a drug more likely to be used by African Americans and Caucasians. The fact is, each drug is equal in its pernicious effects on society, and that 100-to-1 ratio was wrong, and we changed it to 18-to-1. It should be equal, but we changed it to 18-to-1. Accordingly, for the first time probably in the history of this body, and maybe any legislative body, sentences were reduced, which means that the public policy of the United States of America is now that those people are being unjustly incarcerated. But it was only passed in a prospective and not a retroactive fashion, which it should have been, because their public policy shows they are being unjustly incarcerated. The President has seen the need to have more commutations and pardons. It costs us $30,000 a year to incarcerate an individual. And if people are in there on sentences that are void against public policy, they should be released. They should have a commutation when they've served their time according to the law that has existed in this country from 2010 to the present. It would reunite them with their families, get them back into society, and save the public the cost of incarcerating them. So what this particular amendment would do is take just $2 million from the Bureau of Prisons, which has a budget in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Their budget is $7 billion with a $121 million increase. So it would take $2 million from the Department of Prisons, which is 1/350th of what the Bureau of Prisons gets, to put that money not into the Bureau that would have these people where they're incarcerated unjustly, but to give the money to the Department of Justice where they can ascertain which individuals should appropriately be recommended for commutations and save money for society and reunite people with their loved ones and give them freedom. Freedom, which is so important, and liberty. Now, I know some of the amendments have been talked about, and they said, well, we don't want to put any of the people in the Bureau of Prisons at risk. I would submit to you that by taking $2 million from the Bureau of Prisons and allowing more people to be recommended for commutations, there will be less people in prison, less need for those personnel, and less likelihood of having any problems. But beyond that, the Bureau of Prisons would see to it that $2 million didn't come from areas where prison guards would be endangered. They could take that from personnel, they could take it from management, they could take it from administration, they could take it even from the areas where the prisoners get their clothing or their food or whatever they get. I assure you that $2 million will not jeopardize a single member of the Bureau of Prisons, but it will give people freedom and liberty at $30,000 a year for the taxpayers. So I would hope that we could approve this, give this newly invigorated Department of Justice office for commutations $2 million to hire more attorneys to make sure they make the right decisions and they make plentiful decisions to give people liberty and save the taxpayers money. So I would ask for a positive vote, and thank you for the opportunity to present this amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I oppose the amendment. Chairman Goodlatte, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who is here and just left, strongly opposes the amendment. There's no authorization. There's no appropriation. Congress never approved it. It's almost like an executive order out of nowhere. And again, so the chairman of the full committee, we've tried to work closer together. We have had a better relationship than we've had for a long time. The authorizers oppose it, and so I strongly oppose it and ask for a no vote on the amendment. And yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose? The gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition.
Strike the necessary words.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I oppose the offset. I do not oppose the notion that we should have a more robust clemency approach in our country. I commend the administration for this, and I hope that we can find a way to provide more support. I don't agree with the gentleman's math that $2 million cut from any number of other places in the Bureau of Prisons would be just fine. I know these accounts pretty well, and I have some concerns about that. But I do think that in a $28 billion investment or spending in the Department of Justice in total, clearly there are dollars that could be used so that innocent people in our country, or those who have deserved to have some relief, can appropriately apply for clemency. And I'll be glad to work with the gentleman on this as we go forward. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Tennessee. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion
I would ask for a recorded vote. I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Tennessee will be postponed. For what purpose? The clerk will read.
Page 23, line 8. Office of Inspector General, $88 million. United States Parole Commission salaries and expenses, $13,308,000. Legal activities, salaries and expenses, general legal activities, $893 million.
The clerk will suspend. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Fleming of Louisiana. On page 23, line 24, after $893 million, add reduced by $866,000. On page 100, line 17, after $0, add increase by $866,000.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And again, I want to thank my good friend Chairman Wolf for all the many years of service he's provided and the great work he's doing on this appropriation. My amendment simply reduces the Department of Justice's general legal account by $866,000, specifically targeting the Deputy Attorney General's office until the Attorney General enforces the Controlled Substances Act, as well as the Bank Secrecy Act. My amendment does not reduce the enforcement funding available to DOJ, but rather decreases available funding for the salaries of individuals who are delineating ways to evade federal law. Madam Chairman, it is with growing alarm that we see this administration selectively executing and enforcing federal law. The CSA sets forth 5 classifications or schedules for controlled substances. Marijuana, along with heroin and LSD, are Schedule I drugs without accepted medical purpose and which have a high potential for abuse. Smoking marijuana remains a federal offense, and growers and distributors could and should be prosecuted. Despite DOJ's responsibility to uphold the CSA as the law of the land, over the last few months, the Department of Justice has issued several memos suggesting ways for states like Colorado and Washington to evade federal law and the federal law enforcement, and encouraging other states to follow suit with decriminalization and potentially legalization. Any Google search will tell you that the first of 8 federal priorities outlined in Deputy Attorney General James Cole's August 2013 is being run roughshod in Colorado. Kids are quickly gaining access to marijuana. News accounts from Colorado describe elementary children selling pot at school. In February this year, both the Department of Justice and the Department of Treasury outlined ways for banks and other financial institutions to circumvent federal law, in effect giving tacit approval for financially facilitating the marijuana industry. Madam Chairman, I don't have time to delve in all of the negative issues regarding health care and marijuana, but it is vitally important for my colleagues to remember that the scientific facts and recent studies all point to the fact that marijuana is highly addictive, is closely linked to altered brain development, schizophrenia, mental illness, heart complications, lower IQ, and impairs attention, judgment, and memory functions. I would like to close by reading the following statement from the Drug Enforcement Agency's DEA May 2014 booklet on the ugly truth about marijuana. Legalization of marijuana, no matter how it begins, will come at the expense of our children and public safety. It will create dependency and treatment issues and opens the door to use of other drugs, impaired health, delinquent behavior, and drug drivers. I think the DEA got it right. It's time for the rest of the Justice Department to do their job and enforce current U.S. law that recognizes marijuana's devastating impact on our children and society. I am hopeful that my amendment will encourage DOJ to take steps necessary to correct any misunderstanding regarding federal enforcement of the CSA and the BSA. I now urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Louisiana yields back.
I would move to strike the last word.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I support the gentleman's amendment. I just reading the dangers and consequences of marijuana abuse. What is happening to our country? I saw a report today showing in the Hill newspaper buyer's remorse on marijuana. The growers in Mexico are not growing marijuana now. They're going into the poppy because they're now doing it in Colorado. I cast the deciding vote against smoking on airplanes, and now we're encouraging or allowing people. I mean, it's just so I think the gentleman's right. And I have been disappointed in the Justice Department because, we should follow the law. The law is the law, and I think the gentleman's right. You're seeing the skirting of the law. There's much more. We're going to have a big debate tomorrow, I guess, on this whole issue a little bit differently than this, but I think the gentleman's right. The law is the law, and the Justice Department should be seeking justice and enforce the law. If they don't like the law, they should come up here to Congress and change the law. Reasonable people can debate it and have differences. But I think the gentleman makes a very powerful point, and I strongly support the amendment. Yield back.
Yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we near the midnight hour, as Wilson Pickett would say, in the midnight hour, we drift off to reefer madness type of logic. We saw reefer madness in the 30s, and it's come back to Congress here 80 some odd years later. The fact is, we're not talking about marijuana for children. Children shouldn't be doing marijuana, nor should they be smoking tobacco, nor should they be drinking beer or alcohol. We're talking about adults, and we're talking about should adults who are behaving according to the laws in the states in which they live, and the states pass certain laws in Colorado and Washington concerning legalization, and in 20 some odd other states in the District of Columbia pass medical marijuana laws. Should those people who abide by the laws of the state, the laws that is closest to them, that some on the other side of the aisle would regularly say we should defer to the states and we should let the states set the policies for everybody. We do that on a lot of things, but we sometimes don't do it on these particular issues. The fact that people are being incarcerated in great numbers and losing their liberty and having a scarlet M put on their chest that denies them public housing on occasions denies them scholarships, denies them opportunities to work, is wrong. And it's throwing, even if you take the arguments that the gentleman on the other aisle make, if you accept them, it still doesn't fit the punishment, the lifetime scarlet letter that you put on an individual. The Department of Justice is correct to respect the laws of the states and to put an understanding that heroin and crack and cocaine and meth are drugs, and prescription drugs are drugs that really cause the evils we have and the problems we have in society that make people commit crimes to feed their habits. Marijuana does not make people commit crime. It makes them overeat. It doesn't make them commit crimes. And that's why we need to prioritize the resources we have in this country toward those drugs that really cause problems to others. I commend the Department of Justice for their discretion. They haven't gone as far as they should. And the laboratories of democracies, the states, as Louis Brandeis called them, are doing a great service to this country in Colorado and Washington to see how it works. They're bringing in millions and millions of dollars. Violent crime has gone down in Colorado. There have not been the problems alleged to have occurred in other areas, and we can wait and see how those states' experiments go. And the Department of Justice is allowing the experiment to go on for other states' benefits. And I would yield.
And I would say to you that since science tells us that the more drugs, whether it's marijuana or heroin or whatever, that is out there in society on shelves in homes, the more likely children will get involved in them. And as they do, in their young brains, young developing brains, they're more likely, 5 times risk, to have an addiction, and that is what gets them in prison. And trust me, my friend, I can tell the gentleman that whether it's marijuana or heroin or methamphetamine, as a drug addict once told me, all addicting substances are gateway to other addicting substances.
So should we make alcohol illegal again? That exercise and prohibition that was brought by this Congress that was proved to be such a failure that it was repealed later on? Should we make alcohol illegal because kids might get it? I submit to you, if you want to do that, you be the leader.
With the gentleman, you?
Yes, sir.
Alcohol has been a part of our society and culture for thousands of years. It's part of our religious practices. It was impractical to have prohibition.
Bourbon is part of our religious practices?
Alcohol is part of our religious practice.
Wine. So make wine legal.
That's
how about bourbon and scotch and vodka and gin?
But also, so it's been culturally accepted for many generations, whereas marijuana hasn't. So if alcohol is a problem, why do we want to add another problem in the form of marijuana?
It's been culturally accepted not in your area, but in some cultures it has. And in the African American community, you are 8 times more likely to be arrested and sent to jail because of the color of your skin. It has a disparate impact on minorities, always has. And if you go back to the genesis of the laws in the 30s, it was made illegal because of discrimination against Hispanics. And in the 70s, Nixon spoke out, as did Haldeman and Ehrlichman, and they said, this is something we can't talk about African Americans in the inner city, but we can take their drug of choice and make it illegal.
The gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania?
I rise to strike the last word and hopefully to offer the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I resemble some of the remarks that have been made of late on the floor. And I want to say a couple of things. One is that a lot of us like to hold on to things, but, you know, life moves on and the country moves on. There's a point in time in which the country made a decision around alcohol and put it in a different category than other things. And seemingly the public is making a decision about marijuana. Now, it may have something to do with the last few presidents we've had who all agreed that they smoked marijuana, or may have something to do with medical marijuana and the notion that it can help in terms of dealing with some of the pain that people feel when they have chronic pain and diseases. But whatever is going on, the truth of the matter is that the Congress we're probably the last to hear of it, but the nation's kind of moved on. And you see this in the state actions. You see it in my hometown where the district attorney got elected 4 years ago and decided he was not prosecuting any more marijuana cases where people had just possession for use. And now, 4 years later, the city council has finally decided, well, maybe the police shouldn't lock people up since the DA is not going to prosecute them. And so sometimes those of us who are in political office, you know, we get dragged along a little slower, but it doesn't matter what we decide on this issue. There are decisions being made, and the country's moving in a different direction, very similar to the decision that was made on prohibition in terms of alcohol. And no, I'm not going to yield because I'm going to offer the last word. So the point here is that we'll vote however we may vote. It will not be the deciding issue in this regard, all right? Because local communities are deciding, just like in Kentucky now, you have Mitch McConnell and others talking about what we're going to do about hemp. And, you know, there's going to be some movement here on some of these issues. And those of us who got a few gray hairs, we might just have to, you know, hold on and know that the country's made changes on some of these social issues, but there's still the reality that when we made the change on alcohol, we went from shooting up and down the street during Prohibition over it with Elliot Ness and crew to a point where we have accepted it as part of, as you said, our culture. Now, it's still not healthy. It's still addictive, and it's still a drug, but it's not criminalized in our nation, and that might be where America's headed on the question of marijuana. And some of us at times have to accept change for what it is. They say change because people have grown to a different point of view, or as the president has said, you evolve on some of these issues. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.